Oh, good. I was like, please go away. It's like, that's the bar that wouldn't move. Okay, awesome.
No, you're good.
Yeah. So we have participants coming in. Welcome, everybody.
Oh, we do.
We're just going to sit here awkwardly for a couple minutes. And we can't see any of you, so we just get to stare at ourselves and watch the numbers rise.
It's beautiful.
It's great. Give it another minute here. All right, well, it's 12:15, so we can get started. Good afternoon, everyone. We'll start with some introductions. So I'm Tessa Mulcair, and I manage the shelter programs at Youth Empowerment and Support Services.
And my name is Alice Wamera. I am the supervisor at the Cohort Living Program at our hostel location, which is under Homewood Trust's COVID-19 strategy under Bridge Housing. For anyone who doesn't know Youth Empowerment Support Services, also known as YESS for short, we work with youth 15 to 24 who are experiencing difficult realities like homelessness, and we operate the Nexus 24/7 Emergency Sleep Shelter, the Armory Resource Center, 2 supportive housing programs, as well as for the short time, the cohort.
So some of you guys here today might be thinking, but I don't work with youth. Is this session going to be relevant to me? And I want to assure you that although our primary demographic is youth, the learning here can be applied to any demographic. So whether you're working primarily in addictions or with veterans or supporting people who are pregnant and parenting, if you're having trouble with engagement, you're in the right place. So if you've spent any time in youth services, I'm sure you've heard these words or more used to describe youth who are struggling to connect to services. As any parent of teenagers can tell you, this is a time when humans really struggle to figure out what they want. And really, they barely know themselves. This age is where we all developed our sense of self and began to understand where we fit in the world, what kind of goals we want in our life, and we started navigating intimate relationships. It's a messy, messy time for everyone. So layers of instability, as severe as homelessness, can really throw a wrench into the natural development cycles. Psychologically, socially, even physically, all of it gets railroaded. Homelessness for youth is not always related to poverty either, but it's often due to extreme turmoil at home, abuse, sexual abuse, rejection from their family. Even today, we have a lot of youth enter our doors that were kicked out of their home and family because of their sexuality. This chaos of emotional baggage mixed with active trauma of being homeless and hormones and more all turns into what looks like indecision, lack of trust, lack of motivation, and reluctance to programming or rules or the future. So youth homelessness is different than adult homelessness because youth are different than adults. But why is it so important to intervene with youth homelessness specifically? So research from the Canadian Point in Time Count and a separate American study both estimated that up to 50% of chronically homeless adults first experience homelessness in a little narrow pocket of youth. We created this little graphic to help you visualize just how disproportionate this is. So when you hear something like prevention of adult homelessness starts with youth, this is exactly where that idea is rooted. If we can effectively prevent or intervene in youth homelessness, we can potentially prevent half of all chronic adult homelessness. So whatever your demographic is, you just need to make sure that you understand what makes your demographic different than similar populations. Make sure you know your big whys. This is a small to our why. And now the rest of this presentation, we're really going to try to focus on the how. So COVID brought a lot of awful, we all know that. So it's important to recognize the silver linings when we find them. And for us, one of those silver linings was the opportunity to experiment with programming. YESS was provided with a 1-year lease for a local youth hostel to operate a youth-specific bridge housing type program. This 1-year constraint gave us the perfect chance to try something a little different, authentically youth-led programming. So what if your clients created the rules for the programs that you run? What if they created the structure that you work for the work that you do with them? What do you think that program would look like? I think a lot of us make assumptions. We take our demographic, for example, youth. I would bet that most people in this virtual room would assume that if youth had their way, the program would be a 24/7 party. Relaxed rules, complete freedom. You know, the movies when the high school kids' parents go to town for the weekend and it devolves into this chaos. It would be something like that, right? But that's exactly what we did. We let youth design every aspect of the program that we could allow them to control. Obviously, there's some rules that were not negotiable, like fire code stuff, building lease agreement items, general laws, and of course, COVID rules, which is the whole reason that we had the program. For the rest of it, though, we had a forum where 17 youth sat with us for 6 hours and hashed out the program. And you know what? They made a solid and fair structure. What was really interesting about this was the areas where they actually had more strict rules than what we would have even made. An example of this, just generally in our programs, if we need to restrict your access, so say you assaulted somebody in program, we give you a 2-week restriction, and then you can advocate to return to services after that 2 weeks. In this program, where youth make their own rules, they ask for 1 month instead of 2 weeks. Why? Because they said that 2 weeks wasn't long enough to stop them from making a choice to break the rules. That 2 weeks is pretty easy to deal with hopping around or finding places to crash, but 1 month, that was too much for them. And they wanted a stiffer consequence to help themselves stay in line and on track for their goals. They know themselves. They are the experts of themselves. And when given the opportunity, they were able to articulate perspectives that we as staff and program developers cannot. We ensure the spirit of being client-led continues by hosting wing meetings where the youth get to gather and talk about peer-created rules that might not be working for them in practice. They air their grievances, they talk it out, they talk about their options, and they decide if the rule wants to change. And if they want it changed, then we change it.
So to speak more on those wing meetings, our very first wing meeting, it was like having a bunch of scared people in a room, all these young people that were like, okay, are you actually going to listen? Having that forum in the beginning was great because they got a little taste of what it's like to actually get heard, and to see everything that they had told us come into writing, and to say, hey, look, you recognize that these were your words, and they got to sign off on that and feel like they had created something. But to trust that that process could continue was something we had to build as an agency and as caregivers, to build that foundation of trust with them and eventually build that relationship of trust amongst themselves as they build this community in the cohort of what they would like to see and how they would like to coexist with each other. And we put that in their hands. So these wing meetings eventually ended up being such a safe and wonderful space for youth to be able to voice exactly what they felt they needed, and to also bring up concerns for those they cared for. So it wasn't just it's time for me to talk about what I want. It's, well, I noticed my friend over here is also struggling with this. What are you guys going to do about it? And they held me accountable to a lot of things that I wouldn't have been aware of, but they were able to figure it out because they know each other best, as you said.
So unfortunately, we don't have a lot of quantitative data that we can share as we're still in the middle of this experiment. We've got a few months left before we're really going to have some good numbers to try to throw behind this. But we can absolutely share some qualitative stories with you today. So let's talk about how having 17 youth make the rules for everyone changed things. So defensiveness shifts immediately when it's explained to someone moving in that other youth just like them made the rules. I typically do the intakes into the program. Most of these youth are pretty jaded, institutionalized, disenfranchised, whatever you want to call it. They come into a new program and their guard is always up. I've been in this field for over 20 years and I can tell you it's the same in any program. It takes the youth time to build trust is generally the assumption that we always work with, right? But what's different about doing intakes in this particular program than anything else I've been a part of is that when I explain how we made the rules and the structure, you can see their guard drop physically. They open their posture, they perk up, they're intrigued. They immediately understand that this program is not like other programs they have failed at. A spark of hope ignites. If my peers made this program, maybe it'll actually work for me. This usually gets followed by a few curious and cautious questions. They're testing the system. This is like in the forum, really makes an impact because that client-led gets used a lot in services for what really at best is client influenced. At YESS, we poll our youth about what recreational activities they'd like to do, for example. That's giving clients an influence over an aspect of programming, but it is not client-led. Surveys and the like offer a very limited perspective, and I would argue that surveys do not offer a voice, they offer a glimpse of an opinion. Surveys can be useful, for sure. They let us try to quantify something that is really qualitative, but they cannot be trusted to capture the whole of a story. So when you're trying to get clients to truly invest in something, they need to understand the story, which anybody who is Indigenous or works in Indigenous programs can tell you makes all the difference. Stories matter. The youth chose to have the consequences for stealing food as almost the same as stealing anything. I often get puzzled faces at this part of the intake. Someone will ask the all-important question of why? Why is this consequence so steep? And if we had to use a survey to make the rules, my answer would be this very basic, well, because this % of youth voted that way on this rule, and that's why it's a rule. But instead, because we did it the way that we had these conversations and got the story, I can say, you know what, when we talked in the youth forum, there was really strong feelings about food theft. Your peers talked about how that bag of Doritos isn't just a bag of chips. It might be the only $2 of cash that they had that week, and that's what they chose to have, and they were really looking forward to it. So the overall feeling was that it didn't matter if it was a bag of Doritos or a sweater or your phone that got stolen, it all feels the same. And everyone said they were sick of being constantly paranoid about their stuff, and they want this place to be different. They want to be able to watch out for each other instead of trying to see what they can get away with. And the measurable result of that is that we see significantly less thefts in the hostel program than we do in our shelter or resource center, despite it being arguably easier to find opportunities to steal at the hostel, considering the amount of shared personal space. But the why of the rule changes the intrinsic investment in the rule. And that investment would not trigger from a survey result. It doesn't have the same meaning.
So to add to that, this is where we talk about accountability. The hostel program, you got to see a lot of accountability amongst the youth themselves. In the same aspect of them creating the rules and being able to say these are the consequences that we have, and we'll use the food example. In the same regard, if let's say a client was just not in their right state of mind or things are going on for them and they make a mistake, you could see 3 or 4 other peers wait outside my door as they literally stand in solidarity to advocate for this person to have support or to have a second chance. And they would all have such great reasons. They would take the time to understand each other and understand their unique needs, which is something that could only be done when there is a shared understanding in language around what is expected, but also what we're living through. There's that sense of, okay, I get where you're at, or I was where you were at, and that sense of accountability to each other. We could also see this in terms of safety, as Tessa mentioned. In a lot of other programs, we'll do searches, we'll do things like that to ensure safety of all clients in program. And usually these searches are done based on, staff concerns that they see, but at the cohort, it's different. You could have youth that come to you and say, hey, Alice, I just know that my friend is struggling and he got in a fight earlier and I just don't want him to bring it here. I don't want him to make any decisions that might get him kicked out. Can you do a search? Just make sure he doesn't have it on him, make sure he's safe for himself and others. And that was mind-boggling for my staff who had worked in services where the youth would hide away from that. And there was no snitching. It wasn't regarded that way. It was, hey, I care about you, so I'm going to stop you from doing something that could jeopardize this or jeopardize my safety or anybody else's. And that level of accountability was seen every single day. Almost all of my search requests came from the youth themselves more than the staff, or were prompted by a youth to ask the staff to come to me and request for that search.
So we obviously don't have a lot of time here today, but we just want to talk about some just kind of keys to capturing a more authentic client voice if this is something that you're looking to do in your agency, your service. So we think that to be authentically client-led, you have to capture the whole voice, and that takes time, curiosity, and follow through. So time. If it's quick and easy to capture an opinion, it will be surface level. To get a deeper investment, you have to provide deeper meaning, which means that you need to spend time with the clients to really understand it. Meet them face to face, give them a group setting so that one, they outnumber you, because this will let them feel safe. If you've got 5 youth hovering around, or there's like 10 staff in a room and 5 youth, they are not going to be open and honest. When we did this forum, there was 17 youth and there was 2 of us in the room. And that was it. They owned that room, and that was a reflection of what they were going to see in the program. They own the program. We are there to support them. And the other thing about group setting is that they can bounce ideas, opinions, and personal experience off each other and come up with a group conclusion. As professionals, we use working groups, round tables, and similar conversations all the time to make decisions. So extend the same courtesy to the clients you're trying to get a voice from. Don't just assume that if you ask them a question, they're just going to be like, yeah, this is the answer. I have this all thought out. Curiosity. So set your own personal agenda aside and listen, ask questions, and get to the heart of the why. I didn't come to that group with a list of rules and then have them talk about them. Instead, I came with a list of topics and said, what would you like to do about this? What if this happens? So use your knowledge as an expert in the field, because it's not useless. I think some people get confused about that when they talk about client-led discussions. Then they'll say things like, well, why do they even need me if I'm if they're the experts? But it's not like that. You can use your knowledge as a guiding tool to ensure that you have a thorough discussion. You can probe, you can ask questions, and you can even provide your perspective when they get stuck or perhaps didn't consider an angle that could become an issue. So your expertise is a tool, not a weapon. And there's a big difference between saying something like, that's not going to work. If someone comes in with problem X, that's going to cause Y for them. Or something that's softer, like, hey, I understand that you want this for your situation, but I'm really curious how you think someone with problem X would respond to that, and how can we make sure that they're supported? And the answers you get when you ask questions in that way are gold, because like Alice says, they want to watch out for each other. They know what's up, and they might not have thought in the moment about their peer who has this issue, but if you bring it up and ask them, they'll come with creative solutions. And then follow through. So of course, all the best intentions mean absolutely nothing if, when tested, everything defaults back to do as we say. It's very important that staff at every level understand the big picture of what your goal is and reframe their practice to think of themselves as supports for the client's program. They own that program. You are there to support them.
Okay, and we're going to end this with a quick little case study. I'll just take a couple seconds to walk you through one of our amazing young man's journey. This young man was actually part of our forums when he first initiated this project, I'll call it. And he was there, and he didn't contribute too much until towards the very end. And like I said, the forum, it was a bit scary at first. Like, are you guys really going to listen? And he got into the cohort, and shortly after getting in, it took him a while to realize, like, oh, I am going to be somewhere safe. Like, I am allowed to come and go. I'm allowed to work on just my needs. That was a really hard thing for him to understand. Like, okay, well, continuously would ask, what do you expect from me? Like, okay, so what's next? And we would go back with, well, what do you need next? Like, what do you want next to be next? And he worked through so many things, both professionally and personally, with family, with friends, relationships. At the time that he came into the court, it was a very vulnerable time for him because it aged out of Nexus. So having Hope Mission was not a viable option for him for safety reasons. So he was just kind of out, sleeping rough. And now he had access to adequate short-term shelter without any fear of losing that. His journey looked a lot like watching the forum get created, watching the program actually hold the accountability that we said we would hold to them, and vice versa. So as you saw him progress, we would have intakes, and that young man would be right there ready to teach and guide others as they came in. When situations arose, he was no longer just another follower or scared of his own abilities. He came out of his shell and was like, hey, let's figure this out. Wing meetings, he'd be right there giving incredible feedback. And throughout his journey, he got into our YEG program, got employed with the practicum placement, was able to hold on a job for the longest time I'd ever had, and grew such a confidence. It was amazing. His voice, his confidence, his skill set grew. And at the end of it, he just recently got housed. We're very excited for him, but it was incredible. His biggest feedback to us was, I got to be a part of a community. I got to create something, and then I got to contribute to it. And now I get to leave it knowing that I did something and I accomplished something that feels good. And that really was the goal of the cohort.
So that is our super short presentation. And I know that we're supposed to have a question and answer kind of period here, and I have no idea how to see your questions. So I think it looks like I'm hoping that you all can see that there's like a little box that says question and answer. It says no open questions. So if you have a question, feel free to pop it into that little thing. If anybody from Homeward Trust is on here and has any advice on how to do this particular thing, now would be a great time to let me know.
Real good time.
It's the one part I didn't test when we came on here earlier.
Let's see.
Okay, I still see no open questions. So we'll just assume you don't have any, and we can finish up a little earlier than scheduled, which means you get extra lunch hour back, which is always nice. But our email addresses are here. So if you do think of something after, or if you're trying to do more of like a client-led approach in, yeah, I do see the question in that window. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Brandon. Yeah, if you have any questions and you want to email us, please let us know. If you just want to pick our brains about the youth forum, about how to ask those kind of questions at open, anything about client-led services and kind of the learning that we can share, we are happy to answer questions. So you can give us an email and we'll let you know. But that's that then. So I don't see any new questions. Oh. This has been so awesome. Thank you. If you're starting the cohort, set up now. What might you do differently?
On your level, what would you do differently?
On my level, what would I do differently? You know, honestly, like one of the things that's our biggest handcuffs is the time constraint. So because we only have this program for a year, it's difficult to do this knowing that we all know that it's going to be taken away. So we have youth that are invested who, you know, even now are just doing intakes and there's only a few months until we have to close our doors. So that's really difficult. So if I had a magic wand, I would say I would want this to be a more permanent program. However, as anybody in this room probably knows, it's quite difficult to convince people that youth especially can make their own rules and they could make their own program. And I think that's true about any demographic. If we sell that to funders, it's a hard sell to say, no, trust us, they can do this. So what's been just amazing is that we got this opportunity where we had 1 year where there was very little consequences of it not working out, where we could say, you know what, like, let's give us a chance. We'll prove to you that this can actually work. We'll prove to you that this will work for these clients. So that's been really great. Another question of Alice, do you have anything to add to that one?
No, the only thing I would want to do is just like, I'd like COVID to slow down so I could bring in more programming. The clients just really wanted to do more like icebreakers and stuff together, and maybe some like community, there's a lot of like community volunteering they wanted to do together so that the community could get to see that they were good people, as they love to say. So I think just like, being able to connect them to the world a bit more.
Yeah, COVID has been difficult for sure. And I mean, we all know that COVID changes the dynamic program, right? So it's hard to build relationships when the whole point of this kind of cohort living is that they are youth, right? They need that socialization. So when you have to restrict that because masks and distancing and all this kind of stuff, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but it's still 2 steps forward. So we're still taking it. Did you need to get special buy-in from leadership and the board, or was this model an easy win? We are very lucky in that our executive team is really interested in kind of pushing boundaries and doing things that are innovative and trying to find things that work. I think we all collectively recognize that everything that we've been doing, even as a city level, is not quite working as well as it really needs to. There needs to be more of a focus on permanent supportive housing and, you know, all these kind of gaps that people are getting stuck in the middle of. So we're very lucky in that we had a ton of support in giving this a try. And yeah, so I think maybe on a board level, there might have been a few raised eyebrows, but I didn't need to be in those conversations. Margot had her back as our CEO, so it was good. What other engagement opportunities are there at ARC and other programs? So do you mean for youth or for community, for staff? I'm going to assume that you mean for youth. So ARC and other programs, the resource center, anybody who's at the hostel still has access to the armory. So for example, in the case study that Alice was talking about at the end, the program, our employment program, is offered through ARC. So they were able to kind of refer into there. So anybody who's at the hostel still has access to our resource center. Obviously they wouldn't need our Nexus program or you know, some of our other programs because they do have that bed at night. What happens to youth who age out of programs? Wow. Great question. We know it's coming, so we're really, really conscious of trying to make sure that we are conscious of that in moving them through kind of their case plans and everything, and having just really honest conversations. For some youth, aging out is a great catalyst for change, and just generally in any of our shelter programs. So we know that, you know, you can have youth who just kind of get comfortable in the way that they're living. And so when that number is kind of getting up there and they know they've only got a few months in program, they'll suddenly be like, oh, can I apply for everything? We're trying to get you to do this months ago when we had time. But it gives them that little bit of fire. So that's nice. When they age out of program, they really can't be with us. We can do follow-up with them, but because our mandate is specifically in our licensing and all of that fun stuff is to specific ages, our hands are kind of tied. So once they've aged out, we will absolutely refer them to community resources and other things that are appropriate for them. But our overall goal is always to try to get them to be on their feet and ready and prepared to transition into the community and just be a normal member of society by that point. Anything to add to that one, Alice?
Yeah, I think that what made the hostel program pretty unique in terms of like aged out is that because Nexus and ARC have different age requirements, you'll sometimes have like a friend or a partner who is 21 and you want to keep them safe, so they're staying at Nexus, but you are staying at Hope because you're 22, 23. So it was really great to see those that had aged out of programs already understand that and almost like teach and model to other people how difficult it is. And it almost lit like a community fire amongst all of them of like, okay, I don't want to end up like that. Like, I don't want that stress. So what can I do? And so there was that sense of teaching from those that were a little bit older. And then of course, for those who completely age out of services, because YESS is unique in a sense of like you age out of kind of one program and then you age out of youth services as a whole, you have already gone through that first transition, right? When you're out of Nexus. So they know, they have felt that shift for themselves in their lives and they're able to really hone in on that. And at the cohort, because it's very much, what do you want? Like, I don't want to feel like that again. Okay, so they're very aware of like this second transition, I need more control. I need to be able to pick what happens next, not have it happen to me. So that was one way that the cohort kind of helped bridge that gap.
I have a question that says, I'm curious, what rules did the youth create around substance use or coming home under the influence? So one of the things here is that it's one of those hard and fast rules. You cannot use on property because that is the hostel's rules. It's a lease, it's not our building, it's not even an option for them to make a rule that allows them to use substances on program. So that was out of the question. But as far as coming home under the influence, no problem. What the focus became really on is trying to know yourself. So if you say we're not using heavily but you were going to go have a weekend drinking and you know that if you're drunk, you don't follow rules and you're quite aggressive and you're going to come home and you're going to start kind of breaking these rules, that it's that that ability that adults really need to kind of plan that usage out, right? So if you know you're going to go make this decision, make a plan to stay somewhere else where you're not going to end up jeopardizing your housing because of the way that you're going to act when you're drunk, right? So it became a lot more about those questions of like, how do you actually, how do you know yourself? How are you going to behave? What are the consequences that you're willing to risk for this usage and that sort of thing? And I'll let Alice talk a little bit more about the heavier usage individuals who are in our program.
Yeah, we had a support wing which focused on those that do struggle with substances, and the same rules applied, right? You can't use in program. However, we will have access to naloxone kits. We will safety plan with you, and what it came down to was the fact that they also had access to other healthier individuals who weren't struggling with substances. Made it quite a lot easier on staff, because you would have somebody in support wing go to their friend and generally and say, hey, I'm going to go out, can you keep an eye on me? Like, really, honestly, as staff, we supported. Like, we did not have to do very much because they created their own community of supports amongst each other. But for those clients, they would ask for their naloxone kit. We'd have a safety plan. They would go, and for the most part, they would check in with staff, but also just check in with each other and come back. And for those who struggled to be safe for themselves, they learned, what other safe places can I go to? And we never had an issue, which is amazing.
Okay, and probably the final question here as we wrap up our last minute. Do you see those youth who age out as having a possible continuing role in this community going forward outside of the specific program? So yeah, I think that a lot of them have gotten that bug for that kind of just leadership, right?
Yeah.
Which is really, really great to see. And I know there's a few that have even talked about like, well, how do I do this kind of a job? Where, they're actually interested in going into like social work or going in like doing CYC or like
we
those
had
kind of
3
things.
applications to Northwest and McEwen.
So it really definitely, they want to invest back in the community. They want to they like that there's this model of things that they can do, and especially for the youth that have been in the system for a long time and know what bad, I'm trying not to swear, know what bad services are, and those people that aren't really, that have more of like the power trip kind of a dynamic when you're dealing with youth. They're in particular the ones that when you show them that what it looks like to empower somebody like themselves, they really want to turn that around and empower their peers, and they kind of catch the bug for the work. So definitely, I think that we'll see a lot of them in the community being the leaders of the future.
Heck yeah.
Okay. That's it. That's our time. Perfect
Thanks,
timing.
everyone.
Thank you all for coming. Again, our emails are up. Please feel free to contact us, or give us a call if you need anything. That's it. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye. I don't know how to exit this. There we go. Bye.